Thank you, Sir Charles. I'm delighted to serve under your chairmanship, and I beg to move that this House has considered the Child Maintenance Service. I'm grateful to the Backbench Business Committee for allocating this debate, prompted by the Work and Pensions Committee inquiry on the Child Maintenance Service. We published our report last April, and the government's response in July. The Child Maintenance Service, which I shall refer to as CMS, was introduced in 2012 to replace the Child Support Agency. Child maintenance is paid in three ways: non-statutory, family-based arrangements where the CMS plays no part; direct pay, where CMS calculates the amount due and draws up a schedule, but the parents themselves arrange payment; and thirdly, collection pay, where CMS collects the maintenance owed, calculates the maintenance owed, collects it from the paying parent, and transfers it to the receiving parent. For direct pay, there was, until I think yesterday, a £20 application fee, waived for under-19s and in cases of domestic abuse. For collection pay, the paying parent pays an extra 20% of the maintenance owed, and the receiving parent receives just 96% of what they would have under direct pay. DWP reported 2.5 million separated families in Great Britain in March 2022, with 4 million children in those families. The National Audit Office says about half receive at least some child maintenance. 1 in 3 have an arrangement that is satisfied in full. Of those with any arrangement, around 500,000 were on direct pay or collection pay, but nearly 1 million had a family-based non-statutory arrangement. The National Audit Office has made the point that take-up of CMS has been lower than expected for reasons which the department doesn't know, and also that setting up CMS has not increased the number of effective child maintenance arrangements. Our report, Sir Charles, made recommendations about the calculation of child maintenance. The maintenance assessed for some parents, and I think this is now quite widely acknowledged, is unaffordable in some cases, causing very serious hardship. The bands for calculating maintenance are in primary legislation, so it's very hard to change them. Christine Davis, who's honorary senior lecturer in mathematics at Royal Holloway, told us that because inflation over the past quarter century hasn't been allowed for, somebody earning today £15,000 should, on the scheme's original intentions, be paying £364 per year in maintenance, but is actually required to pay almost 10 times that, £3,500 per year. Now, the Callan review called for the formula to include both parents' income instead of only the paying parents. The government rejected that, but it did say it would explore the possibility in its review of the calculation formula. And the government has committed, and I welcome this, to a, quote, fundamental review of the child maintenance calculation. The Lords Minister told us in correspondence the review would be wide-ranging and would take some time. I wonder if the Minister, when he winds up, can tell us, can we expect changes before the election? And Sir Charles, this is urgent. We heard of paying parents taking their own lives because the demands being met of them are simply impossible for them to meet. I was in touch yesterday with Mr. Ian Briggs, whose son Gavin Briggs took his own life. Mr. Ian Briggs told me that on the 26th of June 2020, the CMS sent his son a letter telling him he owed nearly £16,000. His son took his life a few days after that, on the 1st of July, and on that day, his account showed less than £4,000 in arrears. Mr. Briggs says, how can this be possible? He's had no answer to that question. The CMS was established to deliver more effective maintenance arrangements, but there's very little data on how many direct pay arrangements are effective. We don't know how much child maintenance is not being paid. So we asked DWP to monitor the effectiveness of these arrangements proactively, for example, with yearly surveys of parents who have direct pay arrangements. The government said no to that. So my question to the Minister is, what are the government's plans for monitoring this, for research on this subject? Does the department think it understands the effectiveness of direct pay? If so, what evidence is it using? We don't think it does. How many direct pay arrangements switch to collect and pay or family-based arrangements in the first 12 months? Does the department know why that's happening? The committee also raised concerns about collect and pay. About half of paying parents with these arrangements do not pay or pay less than they should. And we heard that enforcement is slow and often ineffective. So we welcomed the Child Support Enforcement Act 2023, taken through the House by the Honourable Member for Stroud, who I'm delighted is in her place this morning and makes a distinguished contribution to the work of the Select Committee. The bill aims to speed up enforcement by allowing CMS to make administrative liability orders where a paying parent has not paid and where deduction of earnings isn't appropriate. Previously, CMS needed to apply to a court for a liability order, taking up to 22 weeks. The secondary legislation on this will specify the notice that CMS must give to the paying parent before making an order. That's 7 days for those living in the UK, 28 days for those overseas, and also sets out the process for paying parents who want to challenge a liability order. The government published its response to the consultation on this 2 weeks ago, on the 12th of February. I wonder if the Minister can tell us this morning when the secondary legislation will now be introduced. Another set of recommendations in our report, Sir Charles, were about domestic abuse. In October 2021, the government asked Dr. Samantha Callan, who I've mentioned briefly already, to conduct an independent review of CMS processes and procedures for supporting parents subject to domestic abuse. Her report was published in January 2023, and the government accepted 8 of its 10 recommendations. On the first recommendation, the Child Support Collection Domestic Abuse Bill received royal assent last July, and I'm pleased to see the Honourable Member for Hastings and Rye in her place this morning as well. Where there is evidence of domestic abuse, a parent can set up collect and pay at the start instead of first trying direct pay, so the two parents need not be in contact. Last September, a written answer said bringing the Act into force would require consultation and then secondary legislation. And I wonder if the Minister can tell us this morning what the timetable is for those. Our report asked for a timetable for all the work arising from the Callan review. One strand of that is a pilot of single named caseworkers for complex domestic abuse cases. In the written answer I referred to earlier, the Minister said the department had started a pilot and that the pilot would be evaluated. I wonder if you can tell us when that will be and how the pilots went. I'm worried about this because I spoke yesterday to Rachel Parkin, who gave evidence to the committee's inquiry. She is an abuse victim. The former CMS chief executive apologised to Rachel for how her case had been handled, assured her that she would be on collect and pay permanently, and that she would be in the pilot of a single caseworker. She did have a single caseworker for a period of 8 months. Her calls in that period were automatically routed to the right caseworker, worked very well, and she made real headway in resolving long-standing difficulties. But now, without any explanation, she is being put back on direct pay. She's simply been told by the service that it isn't bound by promises made to her by a former chief executive. She'll be back to random caseworkers, the debilitating need to go through her story every time, which so many people talk to us about during our inquiry. And I will give way to the honourable member. Yeah.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way. I'm reluctant to interrupt him in full flow, but while he's talking about the failures to give adequate support to people who report that they've been living in an abusive relationship, was he as concerned as I was to realise how completely unaware CMS senior management seem to be that very often the abuse or the controlling behaviour only starts after the relationship has ended, and that until about a year ago that was something that just didn't seem to have occurred to anybody at CMS.
Well, I think the honourable member makes a very important point, and I think he's right, and I very much welcome his work and the work of his colleagues on the Public Accounts Committee in drawing attention to a number of these problems. My question to the Minister is, has the idea of a single caseworker now been abandoned? Is there still, in fact, a domestic abuse team in place, or has this whole initiative, which the CMS talked to the Public Accounts Committee about last year, I think, has that whole initiative now been given up? Why is it that someone like Rachel Parkin has gone back to the arrangements that she was promised she would not? So, Sir Charles, in our report, we also raised concerns about paying parents who fraudulently attempt to reduce their maintenance assessment, and about the fact that the department does not estimate levels of fraud and error. The Public Accounts Committee, in its 2022 report, so 2 years ago, said the department had, I quote, not taken responsibility for detecting child maintenance fraud and had shifted the burden to receiving parents who were expected to challenge false assessments. The committee pointed out that a paying parent being notified of being investigated for understating their income will no doubt guess their ex-partner had reported them. And as a result, the committee warned many receiving parents would not report. And I think they were right to make that point. In response, the department said it used risk profiling and threat scanning to target fraud in the child maintenance system, and that it already had proportionate and cost-effective controls. And I wonder if the Minister can tell us what exactly are risk profiling and threat scanning in practice. We recommended there should be specialist caseworkers for cases where the paying parent's income is from self-employment. In correspondence, the Minister in the other place who has responsibility for this part of the department's work pushed back on this on the grounds of funding implications, but the department has said it will legislate to ensure unearned income such as savings, investments, dividends, property income is taken into account automatically when maintenance is calculated, to make it more difficult for, quote, the small number of parents who avoid paying the correct amount. And I wonder if the Minister can tell us when that legislation is going to be introduced. The Government has also just introduced, as I mentioned earlier, secondary legislation to remove the £20 fee for all parents who apply for a statutory maintenance arrangement, and I'd be grateful if the Minister could just confirm that that took effect as planned yesterday. The same secondary legislation also introduced new powers for the Secretary of State to write off maintenance arrears under £7 when certain circumstances are met. Finally, Sir Charles, I do just want to make this point, that there are, as all of us in the House will well know, unending complaints about very poor customer service from the CMS. Very difficult to get through, calls unanswered, incorrect assessments, having to tell the story again from scratch on every call. This service does have a very tough job against a backdrop of pain and conflict, and it's very difficult to provide a good service in that situation. But I wonder if the Minister can offer us any prospect that the improvements needed are going to be made.